Hello. In this video, as in previous ones, I want to persuade you that if you want to change the world for the better, if you want to aid humanity, then it is Christianity, not Marxism, that holds the key to doing this. Now, you might say, well, it's been 2,000 years since Jesus. How come the world's not perfect if Christianity is the way to do it? Well, just take a little excerpt to look at some painting I'm doing round the house. Just look at this doorpost. Now, it's a couple of years since I painted it, but when I did, I sanded it, I primed it, I undercoated it, and gave it 2 coats of, gloss enamel, and it looked beautiful. But look at it now, it's gone all terrible. Now, it's not just paint that starts off as a perfect finish and degrades over a couple of years until you have to do it all over again. It is virtually everything in this world. Everything sort of decays. And it is the same with hard-won freedoms, with advances in looking after people, in improving society. All these hard-won advances can be whittled away and eroded gently over time until somebody wakes up and says, wait, look what the world has become, and has to reform all over again. Or they can be lost in the blink of an eye through some revolution or change in the law. So the work of saving the world, the work of improving the human condition, is a never-ending task. In every generation we need reformers. In every generation we need to be vigilant to maintain the freedoms, the good things, and hopefully to build on those and get one step further. Well, I suppose you could say it's a bit like a game of snakes and ladders, that yes, it's hard work getting up the ladders, improving the world, but yes, hit a snake and zoom, it all seems to be lost and one has to start again. But having said that, I think we tend to underestimate just how many of the good things in our society. Now, I'm not saying that you don't see things wrong. Yes, there are things wrong, of course there are. But how many of the good things have been won by the efforts of people who were Christians, who did that work because of their faith in Jesus, because of their devotion to God, because they believed God was calling them to do this and aiding them in doing it. Now, I can't explain the whole course of modern history in one little video, but let me just give you three women born in the early 1800s who laboured in this field. Of course, they're not the only people who did that, and yes, I'm not claiming that only Christians did it, but I am claiming that a huge amount that was done because of the Christian faith. Well, the first one I want to talk about is Harriet Tubman. She was born in 1820 to slaves, black slaves in the United States. She had the agony of seeing older brothers and sisters, while they were still tiny, sold off to other slave owners and pulled out of the family. She herself, when she was only 6, was sent out to work and flogged so severely that she bore the scars for the rest of her life. And by 11, she was out working in the fields. And here was someone who had suffered, like I say, terribly in the slave field. She managed to escape in 1849 to the north, that at that stage did allow free slaves, if they managed to escape, to settle there. But only a year later, the US Congress passed a law that meant that even if slaves escaped to the north where there had been abolition of slavery, they could still be rounded up by law officers and carted back and handed back to their owners, and imposed very heavy penalties on people who hid slaves. Disregarding that serious danger. Harriet went back again and again and again to the south, finding people, rescuing them, bringing them through the famed Underground Railroad, using her knowledge of the backcountry ways. And as someone said, she usually appeared on winter nights when they were the longest and darkest, so that they could escape detection, and bringing them to the north. We believe at least 70 people she rescued by trip after trip after trip. And she once said that, as a conductor on the Underground Railway, her train never ran off the rails and she never lost a passenger. And she attributed this to her faith in God. And someone said that they had never found anyone, black or white, who had as strong a belief that God spoke to their heart directly and guided them in what to do as she did. And she certainly believed, and, well, success pretty much bears it out, that God directed her and helped her in her efforts. Now, when the Civil War came, she worked as a cook and then as a nurse with the Union Army, and then risking her life again as a spy. And she became the first woman to guide an armed band of 300 men in a sortie in the south, where they destroyed a lot of materiel and rescued some 700 slaves and brought them to safety in the north. She left a legacy, and you can see it on the $20 note here, where she was very belatedly honoured for the work she did aiding the abolition cause, and after that was successful in working to get the vote for women. My next one is Florence Nightingale. Of course, you've probably heard of her as sort of the founder of modern nursing. But she again was born in 1820, and at the age of 16, she had that firm faith in Jesus, and she believed that Jesus was calling her into nursing and to help people in that way. Now, at that stage, she was born into a wealthy family. That was an unthought of thing. That was sort of social disgrace. Nurses were considered the lowest of the low. So she held off for a little while because of her family's objections. But finally she went in and studied nursing and became superintendent of a home for elderly gentlewomen. But when the Crimean War came, she had impressed one of the people she'd had contact with, the Minister for War, and he asked her to put together a group of nurses to go to Crimea. So she assembled a group of 30-odd, half of them Catholic nuns, and she travelled to the Crimea. There she found an appalling thing, that the conditions in the army, the conditions in the hospitals were so unsanitary that far more people were dying of disease. In fact, over the course of the Crimean War, there were 94,000 British troops were sent over. Of those, some 4,000 died of battle wounds. Some 13,000 were invalided out of the army with their wounds, but lived. And 19,000 died of disease. I mean, that is horrifying statistics. Well, she went to work lobbying and getting done in her little hospital, even basic things like the nurses and doctors washing their hands between patients. You'd think, well, that's so obvious. In those days it was not obvious and people didn't do it, but she instituted that. She lobbied to have the sanitation improved, because a lot of people were dying of things like dysentery that was spread through unsanitary toilets and that. And even after the war, she lobbied to have conditions in the army improved, because, as she said, a lot of soldiers, even in peacetime, were dying of totally preventable diseases because there were not sanitary conditions and good food. And, as has been detailed in the histories, she went on promoting the work of nursing, of the ethics and the sort of devotion to duty that nurses should have. And once again, she is one who made a real difference, not just to the individual soldiers she saved, though I'm sure they were very pleased of it, but to the entire ethos and method of medical treatment. Someone who made a huge difference in our world, and she did it out of her Christian faith and sort of with that belief that it was a calling by Jesus to do this. The last of my three women, again, was a devout Christian who, I guess, was sustained in her troubles by her Christian faith, and partly, well, I think probably a lot, motivated in what she did, not only by her own suffering, but by, I can say, that faith in God that made her want to alleviate the suffering of other women. She began her work because she had married a violent and nasty man whose mental and physical abuse of her caused her to finally run away from the marriage, which was, you know, a wicked thing to do in those days. Now, she was a brilliant writer and started to support herself by her writing. But what happened? Her husband, her ex-husband, well, her still husband, applied to the courts and said, well, she was his property, so any money she earned was his property, so he took all the money she was earning from her writing that she needed to live on. Maybe she got her own back because the law also said he was responsible for her debts, so she ran up debts and said, well, you better go to my husband to get paid. But he absconded with the children, and she wasn't allowed to see her children. Well, that's probably a common story even today. But she realised how bad the situation of women were, that they were considered just property of their husband, that they could not own property in their own right. She couldn't sue for divorce. He could divorce her, but she couldn't divorce him. And so she worked through her writings, for her pamphlets, for her letter writing, and in the sort of mid to late 1800s, she actually got British law changed in some very significant ways. She brought in a law where children were not just considered property of the father, with the mother having no rights at all, but that women had some rights to look after and could even be given occasionally custody of their children. She got the law changed that women could own property, that their property wasn't automatically belonged to their husband, that they could own it themselves. I mean, I know that just sounds so basic, you think, how basic can it be? But at that time, it had not been like that. And she got the Matrimonial Causes Act passed, which allowed women to divorce abusive husbands. I mean, these were tremendous advances in looking after women, but once again brought about by a woman, of course, out of her own suffering, but not just out of her suffering, out of her Christian faith and belief.